Welcome to the July Microsoft Teams community call. We have a couple of things today, the Microsoft Teams Toolkit for Visual Studio Code and the Microsoft 365 Developer Program. They'll talk about some feedback that they're looking for and what we're doing with Microsoft Teams there. And I'm going to let Karthig and Alan take over and talk about the Toolkit for Visual Studio Code.
Hey folks, my name is Karthig and I'm a PM on the Teams Developer Lifecycle team. And I'm joined by my good colleague, Alan, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello, yep, Alan Snow, Dev Lead for Developer Lifecycle.
Okay.
That's all you get.
Thank you, Alan.
My favorite color is green. No.
So we're here today to talk to you about the Microsoft Teams Toolkit for Visual Studio Code. Now, the toolkit is an extension that we made for Visual Studio Code that helps you build a Teams app. And when I say Teams app, I'm talking about an app that you can install for Teams that extends one of our extension points in the Teams client. This toolkit is available for Visual Studio Code, but it's also available for Visual Studio if you are more comfortable with that. I've pasted the links at the bottom of this slide. You can see them right there, aka.ms/teams-toolkit. And if you append a -vs to the end of it, that'll take you to the download page for the Visual Studio version of the toolkit. You can also download it directly from Visual Studio Code. And the rest of this presentation, at least my portion of it, will be demo heavy. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and walking through that before we open up the floor to Q&A. Also, please do feel free to post your questions in the chat thread. Alan will be moderating the Q&A. And if he decides something is pertinent to what I'm talking about right then and there, he's going to interrupt and just ask the question. Otherwise, we'll be opening up the floor towards the end for Q&A. So if you ever forget what those links are to find the extension in the Visual Studio Marketplace online, you can also just search for it from this extensions tab in Visual Studio Code. And there it is right there. We're up to version 1.03. We're not perfect. We do have some issues and we need your help finding more issues. So if you actually open up the Marketplace website, the Marketplace page for the toolkit, there is a Q&A section. And we do have a link so you can ask questions here in the future if you have any, and we'll respond. And Alan and I, well, Alan more than me, is more active on our GitHub page whenever this finishes spinning up, which is available here. So you can open up issues as well, and we'll do our best to help you close out your issues if you want to take advantage of that. So I'm going to close this now and open up the toolkit. And I'm going to assume for the time being that everyone on the call is a mix of an experienced and inexperienced Teams developer. And the first thing that you really should be doing as you're venturing out into the land of Teams development is familiarizing yourself with what's possible when it comes time to building a Teams app. So we have different extensibility points, and if you're new, it can be a little bit confusing to hear about what those are. So I would recommend getting familiar with those extensibility points are. And when I say extensibility point, I mean the parts of the Teams UI that you can actually extend when you are building out an app. And let me just quickly go over what that might look like. And maybe I can shrink some of this. Maybe not. Okay. I posted a link in the chat window where it goes over the extensibility points and what they are. I urge you to take a look at those. So when we use nomenclature in the toolkit or in our documentation, you know what we're talking about. But basically, when you are building a custom Teams app, you can extend 3 parts of the Teams client console. So there are tabs, and tabs are pretty much embedded web experiences or websites that are part of Teams. And the advantage of building a tab versus just any random website and have it out there on the web is that it can leverage your Teams context to pull information like your username and your email address and provide that to the app to present in the UI or kick off another flow if you'd like. There are also bots. These are conversational bots. I think you know what those are. That's a somewhat intuitive term. And then lastly, there are messaging extensions. Messaging extensions allow you to extend, let me just pop up my window again really quickly. You guys can see who I'm talking with, that's fine. Anything you see here is a messaging extension. It allows you to populate the message that you're typing with rich data. You can also extend this search bar, command bar here at the very top with the messaging extension app. And lastly, you can also just mention a messaging extension that you've already built. Okay. And start querying or posting actions directly from the message as you're typing it out. Okay, now I'm going to go over how you can quickly get started with development from the Teams Toolkit. And once you've installed the toolkit, it's available in the Visual Studio Code activity pane on the left. And this is our home right here. That's our icon, yay. And I'm going to create a new a new app. Now, actually, never mind. Let me just type one, and I'm going to call this Contoso tab. All right, it's just going to go in here. And this is where understanding what these terms mean comes in handy, what a tab is, what a bot is, what a messaging extension is. So please do check out that link that I shared and familiarize yourself with this terminology and these parts of the Teams client. From here on in, though, building an app is relatively very straightforward if you are already familiar with web development. A tab is more or less just a website that also allows you to call into the Teams SDK. A bot is a Microsoft Bot Framework bot, and you interacted with it just as you would via a website by building a API. And with our bot-based scaffolds that we provide, we are going to be giving you a Node.js server it's an Express server that allows you to receive incoming requests to the bot and send a response back in the form of an adaptive card. And messaging extension, I went over what that is. But building one out is also relatively straightforward in that there is a Node Express server that is listening for incoming requests to your server. And then when a request comes in, it forms a response and will send it out. And the more common way of sending a response out back to the Teams client is from an adaptive card. So building these two components are very similar. It's just a matter of how the user interacts with it and experiences it from the client. The simplest thing you can do is to build a tab. And that's what I suggest everyone do if this is the first time they're building a Microsoft Teams app, because it's going to be a very, very familiar experience for you if you've built a React app. So we're going to create a personal tab, and a personal tab is a tab that's only available to the user who has installed the app or has had the admin install the app to their Teams client on their behalf. So you're not going to be sharing the UI of this tab with anybody other than yourself. It's not going to be exposed as a tab in a group chat or a Teams channel tab. Okay, and if you need that description again, we do have a tooltip here to go over that. And I'm going to build a personal tab because that's the simplest thing we can do. So here we go. This is the toolkit. You can find all of the source code for your project, the scaffolding, right here. And if you look in the components folder, you can see all of the React components that we've created. Our goal with this scaffold was really to optimize for onboarding and learning, making it super streamlined for developers who may now have built on top of the Microsoft stack before to be really familiar with this. So our code base is in vanilla JavaScript, and these components are all in React. If you look I'll quickly go over the details of the scaffold. The app.js file contains all of your routing information. I won't go into the details of this. It's pretty straightforward, but basically for our tab-based app, we are going to have your base tab that has the content that we want to show the user. Our Teams applications do require that you have a link to your privacy statement as well as terms of use. So we have components here that will cover that. Right now, it's super bare bones. All it's saying is terms of use, and privacy will let you go and fill it out. And once you figure out also how Teams app development works, you're free to just scrap all of this and start over with your own generator, another generator like Teams, or just build out an app from scratch yourself. But this we feel will do a good job of really familiarizing yourself with what's possible. And if you choose to extend it, this is a good starting point as well. We've tried to keep it very bare bones. So as you can see, when you open up your tab-based app, what we're doing is getting the Teams context, setting that context to your React app state, and then when you render it, we're grabbing your username from the context and then displaying it. So it's very rudimentary. It's not doing too much, but it gives you an idea of what's possible and how to use the Microsoft Teams SDK. Now, I'm going to install this. Just so we can see it running. And it's running right now. And as it's installing, I will quickly go over some other parts of the Teams toolkit. Okay, so as I mentioned already, oh, by the way, the README is here. You can just follow these instructions here to learn how to get started with developing your personal app. The one problem I will go over right now is that launching your app directly from Visual Studio, this is currently broken, unfortunately. Apologies. So normally, once you do everything you need to do, you simply just go to this debugger button and hit run, start debugging, or just press F5, and your app will get sideloaded, launched to your Teams client automatically. That's not supported right now. So you're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way, which is not too much of a pain. You just need to make sure that you get the zip file from this publish folder and upload it to your tenant. And I'll plug Michael's Office 365 developer program really quickly here because in order to actually sideload or install a Teams app, in order to sideload or install a Teams app to your Teams client, you must have permission to do that. So whoever the Teams admin is for your organization's tenant has to say that sideloading is enabled for this user. If you don't have that permission, and you should do this anyway, go to the Office 365 developer program, and I think Michael has already posted a link to that, and sign up for a developer account and do all of your development from that development account. So you're not running into any permissions issues saying that you can't, for example, install an app, and also just so that you have a nice clean developer tenant for anything you need to do in Azure. So make sure you go and do that. That's a very, very useful exercise. Now, edit app package. If you're already familiar with Teams app development, this is going to be a very familiar experience for you. I will need to sign in as soon as I see the UI to do that. Perfect, okay. Okay, while this loads, I'm going to open up this file called the manifest.json file. So as I mentioned, a Teams tab is just more or less a website that has access to your user context. It's hosted like a website, so it's hosted on a server somewhere. And when you install it into the Teams client, you are more or less just linking to that from the Teams client. If you can think of the Teams client in this case as a browser, and we're just directing the user to the server where that tab experience is being rendered and returned to Teams. So nothing is getting installed on the Teams client. This is not like building an iOS app or an Android app. There's nothing running on your machine. And traditionally, how you install an app is to push two icon files. You can see we have one icon file here and one icon file here. And this manifest.json file, we package it up into a zip file, like development.zip, and then we install that zip file. Now, this contains all the information that the Teams client needs to display your app in the Teams client. So this will include information like what your app is called, the version number, and very importantly, the links where the experience can be viewed. So for example, for our tab, this content URL will contain the address where your tab's content will be served from. Okay, now normally this was done with App Studio, which is an app in Teams. The process of editing this manifest file is called manifest editing, obviously. And this was done in App Studio. We've brought that experience into the Teams Toolkit. And now you can just edit your manifest from the toolkit directly. Okay, so this should be a very familiar experience for you if you've already played around with App Studio in Microsoft Teams. So one advantage of doing that with the toolkit, though, is if, for example, you are creating a bot or a messaging extension, we capture the bot ID for you at provisioning time when you're selecting a project, and we inject all the necessary details like your app ID and bot secrets into the necessary places of the manifest file and the env files that you have. I would like to point out that there are two env files at this point. One of them is your development environment.env, and this env file will feed your manifest.json file. So for example, right now it says that my base URL will be localhost 3000. I'm going to have to change this now because localhost works fine if you're going to be running your Teams app directly from Visual Studio Code with F5. And this should work for me because I've already done some of the prerequisites for that. But if this is your first time, you have two choices. Let me go over that actually. If you would like to run your app, serve your app from localhost, you're going to have to add a trusted certificate for your localhost server, and there are instructions on how to do that. You can follow this. If you don't want to do that, you need a tunneling service like ngrok, which is the one we recommend, to tunnel from your local server to the Teams client. Okay, and for simplicity, I'm not going to do that right now. We're just going to run from a local host, but just understand that if you're going to be running from a local host, click on this link here, add a trusted certificate for localhost so that Teams doesn't block the installation of apps from localhost. All right, so we finished installing. Oh, also, base URL 10, version 10, full app name. If you look at the json.manifest file, these are placeholder values. If you update the development.env file, you will update the placeholders in the manifest.json because some of these values will appear multiple times. To save you some time, you can use the environment file to do that. And also, if you create another env file and another zip file, let's say production.env and production.zip, or local.env and local.zip, each of those are treated as another development environment in your edit app package service. Okay. All right. Anyway, enough with the boring stuff. Let's start this and see how it goes. Now, I mentioned already that normally I would be hitting the debugger and pressing F5. This experience is currently broken, and also the way it's implemented right now, this is being remediated. But if you do this right now, and it works right now, it will also exit your Teams client and restart it. And I don't want to stop talking to you guys, so I'm not going to do that. We're going to do it the boring way. We are going to sideload this app, but let's first wait for the server to finish running. Oh, and if anyone's curious, there is no server logic here in the scaffold because we're using Create React App to provide the scaffold. It's very bare bones. Routing supported, but backend calls aren't supported. We do have work coming down the line to incorporate, if you're interested, a separate server to serve your front end. Sorry, to serve the backend capabilities for your front end. So you expect to see that in the near term. Okay, it's running. So if sideloading is enabled for your organization, this is how you do it. Go to the apps icon here and upload a custom app. And we are going to go to, oh no, what did I call it? I think it was Contoso tab. We're going to go to my publish folder, grab that zip file. Ta-da, okay, so this is the icon we included by default. Obviously, it's not the best, so feel free to change it. All of the information that you find in your manifest file is here. And we're going to add the app. And here we go. Okay, that's fine. Okay, normally you would see a message here displaying your name. I have a feeling that my computer is really slow today for some reason and it's not cooperating. So I'm going to come back to this and also refresh this. But in the meantime, I'm going to go over the other parts of the toolkit. So for anyone who has published to App Source, which used to be called the Office Store, and if you publish to App Source, then your app can be installed from the Teams App Store which is available here. Anyway, before you publish, your app goes through a series of validation checks. And you don't see the status of those checks until you go through the submission process. So to save you time, so to make sure to make sure that you understand why your app might fail validation for whatever reason, we've incorporated the validation checks into the toolkit so that it can quickly just look at your manifest file and see if anything will prevent it from being blocked, prevent your app from being published to the Office App Store /App Store / Teams App Store. Okay, and this is a nifty new feature. In preview, I shouldn't show everyone here this, but that's fine. So what we're going to be doing in the near term is enabling you to publish your app.
Stop the recording. No.
You can publish your app directly to your organization's app catalog as well. So that's coming soon.
This is fantastic. This is really a great idea, and I'm super excited because I'm running the validation program for the other Office apps. So I really wish we had a tool like this. I think you're going to really make it easy for developers.
Cool, thank you. Lastly, bots. If you are building a bot, I mentioned earlier that a Teams bot is powered by a Microsoft Bot Framework bot. And when you create one via App Studio from the tool, there's going to be a configuration. There's going to be an app. There's going to be an instance of an app registration in Azure that you can manage. And to save you time from having to go to Azure to configure your bot, we are bringing that information here. So you will go here to do things. Mainly, you will most likely come here to get passwords for your bot and update the endpoint address for your bot. I don't suspect you're going to be coming here for much else, but these will be common tasks that you do if, for example, you aren't using a paid ngrok subscription. So which would mean that the subdomain for your bot endpoint will be dynamic and changing all the time. So if that happens, you'll have to come here and update the bot endpoint address. Also, I'd like to point out that bots currently have to be behind a tunneling service. So I suggest that if you're interested in building a bot or a messaging extension, that you familiarize yourself with ngrok. It's a great product. We are doing some work to see if we can get around this requirement in the future. So let me go back and see if my message is there. It's not there. What's going on? Let me take a quick look at my code.
You didn't put the certificate in. So you got to do a certificate for each new app you do. You have to create the certificate.
All right, there we go. That explains that. In that case, this is how ngrok works. So I've already installed ngrok. So ngrok is a very simple command line utility. So I'm going to open up a tunnel, an HTTP tunnel, and it's going to be pointing to localhost. And Alan, I think it was port 3000. And I have a paid subscription to ngrok. And what that means is I can provide it a fixed subdomain, and that subdomain is going to be assigned to me if it's available. If you don't have a paid subscription, you can do everything I'm doing, except you can't use the subdomain field. And let me show you what happens when I enter this. Currently, I'm basic. Okay, there we go. Okay, so as you can see, https teamflix.ngrok.io is now being directed to HTTP localhost. Uh-oh, Alan, is that right? Should it be HTTPS or is this fine?
Oh no, that's fine. Because
okay.
Right, yeah, you have to change it to HTTP on here if you're going ngrok. So
okay,
you you could just stop it and then change your env.
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to make sure that my base URL is pointing to my ngrok URL. So it's going to be https teamflix.ngrok.io. Okay, so now my Teams app will know that's where it needs to look. And I'm going to close this. And one more thing, this env file, normally we require HTTPS to be on, but we're going to be debugging from localhost. So I'm going to set this to false. Okay, and I'm going to leave ngrok running. And I'm going to restart this. Okay, and when that finishes launching, I'm going to now, to make it super obvious what's going on, I'm going to go and uninstall the app in my Teams client. I think somebody
you can also just reinstall on top and it will overwrite. But you can, yeah, just to be clean, you can uninstall.
All right. All right, any day now. Okay, Alan, were there any questions in the thread I can answer while we're waiting for the development server to start?
Let's see. I was catching them as I go. Any plan to generate ARM templates, CLI scripts, or even Terraform code for the infrastructure needed to deploy? Deploying to Azure.
Okay, so deploying to Azure, we're doing work to simplify that, streamline that. Nothing I can discuss right now because it's super early into development, and also heard something about CI/CD. So first up on hosting, we're working on the story for that. That's something we're actively working on in H2, but there isn't very much I can share right now because we're very, very early into the stages of figuring that part out. But know that that's on the horizon. With respect to CI/CD, that is also on the horizon. We just have to figure out the best way to incorporate that into what we're doing while adding enough value to justify the work. So we already have excellent, if you haven't tried it already, I urge you to go and install the Azure Tools extension pack, which will give you a nice little bag of tricks if you are deeply embedded in the Azure stack, and you can set up a continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline that way. Do think that there is a gap we currently have in that when you're updating a Teams app, you're really updating two things. You're updating the surfaces of the power of the app, and you're also updating the client UI sometimes, not always. So we have some work to do to really light up this feature, but it's also on our backlog, and it's something that we want to deliver in the near term, but just no concrete plans right now. So my server is running. I'm going to now sideload this app again. And what's cool about this is if you update any env file value, we do generate we update the JSON and we generate a new zip file for you. So at this point, I should have nothing more to do than to open up the Teams client, go back to apps. Yeah, and I'm going to upload this again. And hopefully this time it works with that hitch. It's a good thing I'm not being recorded. There we go. That's what you should say.
Okay, so we had a request because we had a little bit of jumbling. It's like, can we just go through the steps that we did just to get it running? Just I guess we could just talk about each path of like if we want to do the local host and if you want to do ngrok and just say.
Let's do this. All right. So first of all, find this README button. It's handy if you ever forget, because I sometimes forget myself. And let's assume there are two paths. First, I'm going to talk to you about 1 month from now when we fixed our crappy F5 experience. So first of all, I'm assuming that you have Visual Studio Code installed, you have the toolkit installed, you have Node.js installed, and also you have a developer account. Because I'm going to assume that many of you are working for large organizations where you may not know who your Teams admin is, the person that can actually give you permission to install apps. So go get an M365 developer account and get that set up. So you have the team kit, you open up the toolkit, and you build a personal app, npm install, npm start, which will take you to this part right here. Okay. Assuming F5 works, you don't have to do anything else other than, well, adding a trusted certificate for localhost, which we're working to get around. And also, you should set your Teams client to developer preview mode. Okay, and in order to do that, there are instructions in that link. Actually, I won't go through that right now because we're running short on time, but there are instructions on link on how to set your Teams client to developer preview mode, but there's a switch somewhere in the UI that you just need to toggle, okay? Once that's done, what we're going to do is simply go to the debugger and hit run, okay? Start debugging, that's it. It's as simple as that. Today, what you should be doing is making sure you have ngrok. Run ngrok, and let me show you what ngrok looks like if you don't have a paid subscription. Okay, you get this random number for the subdomain. That's going to change every time you restart ngrok. So just have ngrok running and make sure that it's pointing to HTTP localhost 3000. And in the .env file, you want to set HTTPS to false if you're going to go this route. We did have another set of instructions at one point on how to, the golden path for getting your app installed without F5. I think looking at this now, I should probably go add that content back in until we fix the F5 experience. So once again, there are two env files I need to make updates. So you want to update this base URL to whatever random subdomain.ngrok.io was provided to you by ngrok. And make sure you use the HTTPS endpoint because Teams needs your apps to be served from a secure location. Okay, the second thing you want to do is set your HTTPS environment variable to false in the environment variable that's in your project's root directory. Okay, and after you do that, start your server. And that's when you do npm start. And at that point, you should be good to go. It's just a matter of going into the Teams client and sideloading your zip file, whatever it's called. Okay, I think that covers most of this. Any more questions, Alan, that came in?
Did you go over like if you didn't want to use ngrok and just the only pain point was just, so you don't want to use ngrok, you could leave everything the same, but just follow the instructions for creating that localhost certificate, which, it takes like 5 minutes or something. But,
it takes 5 minutes, yeah. But to be honest,
then you could just use localhost and everything run as is.
Run as is, yeah.
Yeah, he just didn't want to go through the steps on this call to do that.
But to be honest, if you're building a bot or a tab, you're still going to need to use ngrok or an alternative solution.
A bot or messaging extension.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
tabs or localhost you can do.
Yeah. So familiarize yourself with ngrok regardless, because it's a useful tool or one of the ngrok alternatives that are out there. Okay, I think that's it for us on time. Are there any more questions that I should?
Oh, there was one more question. I don't know that we answered this one yet. Nilesh asked, how can I integrate such Teams apps into Xamarin Forms-based mobile app?
Oh, I think I answered that one, but
did you answer that one? Oh, yep, yeah. You did. Okay. I'll give a thumbs up or and while we're waiting on that, Emily, do you want to go ahead and share your screen with the slide that you have?
Yeah.
Okay.
Give me 1 second.
Okay, folks, so I'll be dropping off short. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Sorry.
No, she's doing that. So Karthig and Alan, do you want to stay on the line just for a little bit longer in case there's a few more trickling questions on your part, or do you have to go?
Sure, no problem.
Okay.
I have to drop, but Alan can definitely handle.
I can answer whatever you need.
Just in case.
Folks. If you have any questions for a PM, you can find me on LinkedIn, send me a message, or just post a message, honestly, in the Visual Studio Marketplace page for the toolkit if it's toolkit specific. But I'm not that hard to get a hold of.
Okay, right, and then we'll put the resources into the blog post, and we'll have the recording posted in the next few days as well, with all the information that you need for this one. And then we have Emily Chen and Michael Aldridge to talk about the feedback on the developer program and how it relates to Microsoft Teams.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily. So I'm on the same team as Karthik and Alan on the developer lifecycle. So I look at how to enable developer to build higher quality app, and that's from documentation to building control libraries to the validation tool you have seen in the toolkit. And now I'm working with Michael on the developer O365 program to see how we can empower Teams developer there. So just a really quick background, the O365 developer program gives you free tenant that you can use to test your app or just play around for demo purpose and stuff. And right now we provide the empty tenant to you. You can load anything you want. And we've been giving a lot of feedback on, hey, it would be great to see real scenarios in those tenants. So currently we're working on some of the prototypes on what that would look like. And this is when we would need your feedback on what's your pain point for development during Teams, and if anything we can provide through this program through the tenants. So we have a link here for survey, but feel free to fill it up if you want to provide any input, and we'll contact you afterwards for another conference call.
Yep, it's the link's in the chat window already, and it is the Microsoft 365 developer program, not the Office 365 developer program. We changed it because it expands the role for all Microsoft 365 apps.
That's all from me. If there's any more questions, feel free to drop in the chat.
Well, hey, Emily and Michael, we have a few more minutes. Is there anything you want to go into more detail?
We can go a little bit more into the plans we have for the developer program.
I think it would be probably most useful if people just wanted in the chat window to identify what are the things that are the biggest challenges that you face as a Teams developer. We'd love to just get some of that feedback. I don't think we can really show any of the concepts in this forum, but we'd like to just understand pain points, and if there were like the top 3 things you'd love to see us make easier for you, that would be really great feedback so that we can gather that and think about that.
Okay, there was one comment. Initially, M365 Deb subscription is valid for 90 days. Based on usage, it will be automatically renewed.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is true.
Earlier in the chat, I also gave you a tip that if you have a Visual Studio Pro or Visual Studio Enterprise subscription, your Microsoft 365 developer subscription will actually be automatically renewed. So if you look into the chat, scroll up in the chat, you'll see how I show you that if you do have those subscriptions already, that is a way to actually have a subscription perpetually as long as you have a valid Visual Studio Pro or Enterprise subscription. But for people who just joined the dev program, normally it is valid for 90 days and then it expires unless you are actually using it as a developer. If you're using it as a developer, then we capture telemetry based on that, and we will renew it for as long as you're actually using it. So, and one of the reasons why we want to develop more capabilities for Teams developers is to make sure that we're making it more valuable for you, and that we're capturing all that activity so that we can ensure that you have a subscription for as long as you need it.
Is there, people are asking about a GCC dev tenant for government folks?
Yeah, we don't offer a developer tenant today for any of the special cloud services that we have around the world, including for government or for places like Germany and China. Right now, it's primarily just a general tenant, but we have gotten that feedback that some people would like that.
And then can you move a dev subscription from one developer account to another?
Oh, great question. So we can't, and we make it pretty easy. It takes about 3 minutes to create a tenant from beginning to end. So if you have created one subscription, then you have somebody else in the office that has taken over somebody's job, then they just need to create their own subscription. There are tools that are out there to migrate. So if you've actually got credentials for both, there are ways in which you could migrate data from one to the other after you've created the tenant. We don't allow you to do that.
Any other questions on the developer program, feedback you'd like to provide now?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do a more detailed presentation on the developer program and what capabilities are there. And maybe that's something that we can add to the agenda later, once Emily and I actually gather some more feedback and look at different things. A couple of things that we do offer that people might not know about is we do offer what we call sample data packs or content packs. So you can play around with Microsoft Graph and Teams, for example, by actually automatically installing users and mailboxes. And these are all fake users, fake mailboxes. They've even got pre-populated with emails. And so those are two different sample data packs that are available that allow you to pre-configure your sandbox. We'd love to add to that, though, and make it much more exciting for Teams developers. We just launched one for SharePoint, so SharePoint Framework, and we'd love to do something similar for Teams. And that's one of the reasons why Emily and I are partnering together to get your feedback to figure out what are the most important things that you'd like to see there. We know, for example, that turning on side loading is something that's a huge pain point for you, and we're working to figure out how we could potentially pre-configure it so that when you create a tenant, that you're pre-configured for side loading, so you don't have to go in and do that. But if there's any other settings or things that you wish that would be pre-configured for your developer environment to make it just quicker and easier and less time consuming, we'd love to hear all of that feedback. So please fill out our form to sign up, and we'd love to talk with you in depth.
Is there a link for the sample packs?
The sample packs are basically in your dashboard. So if you're a member of the dev program and you have a tenant already created, you'll see little links in your tenant file that actually allow you.
Looking at it.
Awesome.
There's one more question about support for 2 to 3 tenants per account.
Yes. And we don't allow 2 to 3 tenants per account for a normal subscription. If you have multiple Visual Studio subscriptions, for example, you might have a Visual Studio Pro subscription, but you also have a Visual Studio Enterprise subscription, you can end up getting multiple tenants that way, but that's really the only way you can get multiple tenants. The maximum number of tenants per account is 1.
With multiple users.
Yeah, sorry, if you're looking for multiple users, every tenant has 25 users. So sorry, I may have misunderstood the question, but can you get multiple tenants? The answer is no. Can you have multiple users? Absolutely. The tenant is pre-configured for 25 users, including the admin. So you have admin plus 24 other users. And so you can have multiple developers that are using that tenant if you want them to.
You did answer the question correctly. I just wanted to clarify if anyone was not part of the developer program yet, that they had that option for the 25 users. So, okay, any other questions that anyone has? Okay, so make sure that you provide feedback for Teams if you have questions about anything developer related. We have our documentation and then our link to feedback, which is just aka.ms Teams Dev feedback. And then just to wrap up real quick, the recording will be available on our developer YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to. So it will give you updates when all videos regarding community calls, trainings, all snack videos, and other things related to the Microsoft 365 developer platform will be available. You can follow us on Twitter to get all of our latest announcements. And then we hope you'll join our next call on August 18th at 8 a.m. You can download the call series if you haven't already. And I think with that, we'll just wrap up a few minutes early. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.